Greece, an ancient glory and modern struggle. A country that used to produce democracy, philosophy, and Olympic Games. It is, however, one of the most unequal economies in Europe today. More than 28% of the population in Greece risk living in poverty or social isolation in 2025, Eurostat predicts. The 10% of the population with the highest wealth possess close to half of the wealth in the country, and the remaining 50% of the population possesses only 6% of the wealth. The yearly average Greek household income stands at less than €20,000 per year, as opposed to more than €35,000 in the EU average. Youth unemployment, and still lodging above 23%, second highest in Europe after Spain. It is a nation in which the youth are unable to afford to rent, the middle income is declining, and the elderly continue to pay a price due to a crisis that started over 10 years ago. The country that used to be considered the birthplace of civilization is now one of the weakest economies in the European Union. How did it get here? This is Greece, the ailing economy in Europe. The story begins at the dawn of the 2000s. Greece had just entered the Eurozone in 2001, a moment celebrated as a new beginning. The drachma was gone. The euro had arrived. For many, it felt like Greece was finally being welcomed into Europe's economic elite. Overnight, borrowing became cheap, banks were flush with liquidity, investors were eager, and the government's access to credit seemed limitless. Public spending exploded. New roads, stadiums, hospitals, and public sector hiring on a scale the country had never seen before. The Athens 2004 Olympics symbolized this new confidence. Gleaming arenas, modern airports, and massive infrastructure projects showcased a nation seemingly reborn. But behind the marble facade, cracks were spreading. Beneath the optimism, Greece's political and financial systems were rotting from within. Decades of corruption, clientelism, and mismanagement were quietly shaping the nation's economic collapse long before the headlines appeared. Greece's political culture had long been built on patronage networks, jobs, contracts, and favors exchanged for votes. By the early 2000s, this practice had grown into a vast, informal economy. Every new government rewarded its loyal supporters with public sector jobs and subsidies, often regardless of merit or productivity. By 2004, Greece's public sector employed nearly 30% of the total workforce, one of the highest shares in Europe, and many of those positions were redundant. Salaries were funded not by growth, but by borrowing. Meanwhile, tax evasion was endemic. Studies later estimated that by 2009, Greece was losing more than €20 billion a year in uncollected taxes, nearly 10% of GDP. Wealthy elites, doctors, lawyers, and business owners routinely underreported income. Entire sectors operated off the books. As the government's expenses ballooned, its revenues stagnated. But instead of cutting back, officials simply hid the problem. With help from Goldman Sachs, Greece entered into complex financial swaps that disguised billions in debt. These instruments allowed Athens to move liabilities off its balance sheet, effectively cooking the books while still technically meeting Eurozone rules. The European Commission and Eurostat turned a blind eye. Everyone wanted the illusion of stability to continue. For Brussels, Greece was a symbol of European unity. For Athens, it was access to easy money. By 2008, Greece's public debt had already surpassed 100% of GDP, but the official statistics reported much less. Behind the scenes, corruption had seeped into every level of governance, from local councils to ministries, procurement deals, and even defense contracts. Then came the global financial crisis. When markets collapsed, the illusion fell apart. Investors began scrutinizing balance sheets that had long been accepted at face value. The truth emerged. Greece's budget deficit wasn't 6%. As reported, it was 15.4% of GDP, 5 times the Eurozone limit. In late 2009, Prime Minister George Papandreou stood before Parliament and revealed the scale of the deception. Overnight, investor confidence evaporated. Greek bonds were downgraded to junk status, and the interest rates on new loans soared to unsustainable levels. The Greek state was, in essence, bankrupt. The corruption that had been ignored for years, the false accounting, the tax evasion, the political favoritism had now come due. The debt-fueled illusion of prosperity had collapsed, and the real price was only beginning to surface. In 2010, Greece turned to its European partners for help. The so-called Troika, the European Union, European Central Bank, and IMF stepped in with bailout packages worth €260 billion. But this was no act of generosity. Each loan came with crushing conditions: austerity, privatization, and deep spending cuts. Public sector wages fell by up to 30%. Pensions were slashed 40%. Hospitals, schools, and welfare programs were gutted in the name of fiscal discipline. The result was economic collapse. Between 2008 and 2016, Greece's GDP shrank by more than 25%, a downturn worse than the Great Depression. Unemployment hit 27.5%, and thousands of small businesses vanished across Athens and Thessaloniki. On paper, the economy was saved. In reality, the people were left behind. Austerity was not merely a correction of fiscal policy, but a social earthquake. According to the World Inequality Database, the poorest 50% of the Greeks are now worth as much as the wealthiest 1%. Prior to the crisis, the ratio was 1 to 4. Now, it's 1 to 1. In 2010 to 2020, the real income of the richest 10% of Greeks decreased by a factor of less than 10, but that of the poorest 20% of Greeks decreased by 40%. One indicator of inequality, the Gini coefficient, increased by 3 years, to 36, the highest figure in southern Europe other than in Spain. The middle class was drained by austerity. The taxes on low and middle earners went high, and corporate loopholes existed. The rich, or the owners of ships, and the tourism industry rebounded quicker due to offshore tax exemptions and international capital. The Global Wealth Report prepared by Credit Suisse shows that the number of Greek millionaires grew more than 30% in the period between 2019 and 2023. In the meantime, 1 out of 3 households continues to have bills to pay on rent or electricity. Across Greece, prices continue to crush families. Inflation hit 3.5% in 2025, driven by soaring food and housing costs. The average household now spends 35% of income on rent, the second highest rate in Europe after Denmark. A litre of milk that cost €1.10 in 2019 now sells for €1.75. Gasoline averages €1.95 per litre, among the most expensive in the EU. Despite subsidies, electricity bills consume nearly 10% of family budgets. The cost of living has caught up to Western Europe, but salaries have not. The average monthly wage is €1,300, compared to €3,000 in Germany. Small businesses are collapsing under high taxes and low demand. In 2023 alone, over 30,000 small firms closed, according to the Hellenic Confederation of Professionals. Meanwhile, major conglomerates in banking, energy, and real estate dominate the economy. Maybe the greatest casualty of the crisis was not economic, but human. Economists refer to a generation of young Greeks as the lost generation, who grew up with hopes of wealth. At the most severe phases of austerity, unemployment among the young people had surpassed 60%. Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands were where thousands of graduates, doctors, engineers, architects, etc. went to find employment. In 2010 to 2020, more than 500,000 skilled Greeks emigrated, as indicated by OECD data. The country has lost productivity and innovation with an estimate of over €50 billion due to this brain drain. The number of those who departed is still huge. Even nowadays, they have not returned yet. It has become permanent. The country that used to export philosophy and art exports its most brilliant ones. Greece is still ranked as the 3rd poorest EU member, only to Bulgaria and Romania, 10 years into its so-called recovery. Eurostat 2025 estimates that 3 million Greeks, 28.2% of the population, are either under the poverty risk or socially excluded. The minimum wage is €830 a month, yet the average rent in Athens is more than €650. Even a basic amount of groceries is 20% more expensive than it was in 2022. Purchasing power has been rattled away by inflation and stagnant wage rates, sending millions more to the brink. According to the IMF reports, the median disposable income is still 20% lower than during the time before the crisis, which is 15 years later. That is not recovery, that is just paralysis in progress. Greece is a country that receives more than 30 million tourists every summer. That is 3 times the number of its population. Hotels are full in Santorini to Mykonos, and the Aegean has luxury yachts. Greece is appearing as a prosperity paradise to foreigners. But this is a prosperity that is a mirage. Tourism contributes close to a quarter of GDP, but the bulk of the results is enjoyed by foreign-owned chains and conglomerates, but not by local employees. As reported by SETI, Greek Tourism Confederation, the average hotel employee has an income below €900 per month, and in most cases the contract is temporary. Meanwhile, the price of properties in tourist areas shoots up, coinciding with the displacing locals. The €400 a month flat in Santorini of 2015 is currently priced above €1,200, assuming you would be able to secure one at all. Tourism is a source of wealth, but it is concentrated. It keeps the GDP of Greece alive on paper and further widens the gap between the have and the have-nots. Officials boast about recovery. Yes, GDP grew 2% in 2023, and debt to GDP fell from 206% to 165%. But what kind of recovery leaves 1 in 4 citizens poor? Greece's GDP per capita is still 35% below the EU average, according to Eurostat 2025. And productivity remains near the bottom of the OECD. The truth? Recovery exists only on spreadsheets. It's driven by tourism, privatizations, and EU funding, not sustainable growth or innovation. Everyday Greeks still wait for a recovery they can actually feel. Greece is a nation of paradoxes. It has the legacy of Plato, Aristotle, and democracy itself, yet millions can't afford rent or healthcare. It belongs to one of the richest unions on earth, yet a quarter of its people live near poverty. The rich dine along the Aegean Riviera, while families in Thessaly queue for food aid. Austerity saved the numbers, but broke the people. Greece still has sun, beauty, and pride, but beneath the postcard views lies a harsher truth. A country where the future feels smaller than the past. This is Greece, the divided nation of Europe.